Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of meaningful discussions based on the 13 Petaled Rose with Rabbi Chaim Sperlin.
Welcome to class number 5. We're almost at the end of the Seder. One more. We are exploring today unique Jewish experiences. Yes? Unique Jewish experiences, or in Hebrew called a mitzvah. How many mitzvahs are there? What's the official number? To the best of my knowledge, Judaism earns the reward for the religion with the most amounts of commandments. By far. By about, 600%. What other religions have any commandments?
It's 600% the actual.
Kind of. I'm making it up. But they have a couple. And right? And I just want to make sure that I'm not a complete ignoramus. So my good old buddy Google confirmed that there is no other religion that has a structure of practice the way Judaism does. So we have here an infinite amount of mitzvahs and practices and customs and instructions and do's and don'ts, and it's an explosion of the mind, the amount of practice that has been incorporated into Judaism. So today what we want to talk about is not so much the why, because as we have already discovered by now, the why is something we can't so much understand, but we could attempt and explore to understand the what. And that's what we're going to try doing. So let's go through a couple of things here to start. The general number that's given for mitzvot is 613. It's not a correct number. I shouldn't say it's not a correct number. It's not an accurate number. Because first of all, there are 7 rabbinical commandments above those 613, which bring the number to a perfect 620. But that does not include nuances, specifics, little specifics, like Shabbat is one mitzvah, but then there's specifics, many specifics. Chag is one mitzvah. But generally, we have 248 do's and 365 don'ts. The 365 don'ts, the Talmud says, reflects the 365 days of the solar year. The 248 do's reflect our limbs. We have 248 limbs. I checked if that is biologically proven today, and it's not clear. But in one of the blessings that we make on Shabbat, we don't do it on Shabbat, but during the week when we want to give a blessing for somebody who is ill, one of the words that are said in the Mishaberach is that they should have a full recovery in their 248 limbs and their 365 sinews. So it's part of our prayers. So it's universal that we believe that the 613 is divided by 248 and 365. And that division goes to limbs and sinews, which means that our structure reflects our personal structure reflects the structure of the commandments. Just a second. And the don'ts reflect the days of the solar year. What do you want to ask? Sure. I have no idea. It's just the translations of the Mishaberach. No, sinews are more like the tendons. The veins are considered sinews. Arteries are considered sinews. Limbs would be the eyeball, or organs would be considered limbs. Yes. Huh? Bones, I think, go into the limbs category. Yes. I think so. Yes. So that's a great question. You're asking if Judaism does a lunar calendar, why are we talking about the solar calendar? Judaism actually does a dual calendar. We are also the only religion that does a dual calendar. We do solar and lunar. The months and holidays follow the lunar, but the holiday of Pesach has to be in spring, which follows the seasons, which follows the solar. So we have a mesh, we have a fusion between the solar and lunar. That's why we have sometimes an extra month, which we had this year in order to align the years. It's a long discussion. It's a little bit more complex, but the oversimplification of it is that Judaism has a crisscross of lunar and solar together. No, the lunar is 354. The lunar is 11 days shorter than the solar. 11 days and a couple hours, if you want the exact math. And every cycle, even with adding 30 days, which accounts for 3 years of a lost month, you're still losing hours on the fractions, and that only gets lined up many, many years down the line, and sometimes not even. Maimonides has a lot of fun with that connection between the 365 and 354. Anyway, from these 613, many cannot be fulfilled. Right here in the room, we have, I know, at least 2 Kohanim. We have some commandments that are 3 that are just us. So some we can practice and many other Jews can't. So from the 613 right away, a mitzvah that is unique to a Kohen is not universal. There are mitzvahs that are unique to farmers. There are mitzvahs that are unique to women. There are mitzvahs that are only in Israel. There are mitzvahs that are unique to kings. It's very broad. So from the 613, the number that we encounter is disputed somewhat, but the number that we encounter everybody together, men, women, Israel, is about 80. Still a lot more than most. And the 613 is still a system. It's a system. It's a system that arouses curiosity. What is this? What is this? What type of system is required? Why do we need this type of robust force of something that is requiring so many do's and don'ts? Before we go any further, he opens up chapter 10 with the best, I think the best. Here, let's read it. The Jewish way of life on page 113. The Jewish way of life, or the way of life of a Jew who lives according to the Torah, is held to be extremely difficult. According to tradition, there are said to be 613 commandments in the Torah. This, however, is a misleading number in a number of respects. For one thing, many of the positive commandments, that is, mitzvot that obligate one to perform certain actions, along with many of the prohibitions, are not actually concerned with life, but refer either to the general structure of the whole Torah or to the Jewish nation as a body. No Jew, therefore, can be expected to keep all the mitzvot. Actually, only a small number of the mitzvot relate to daily life. Though if one adds this, however, if one adds to the formal list of mitzvot all the minute details that are not specifically included, one arrives at a sum of not hundreds, but thousands of things that are to be done at certain times, in certain places, and in a special way. Indeed, seen as separate and unrelated commandments, each as an individual obligation and burden, heavy word, these ancillary mitzvahs seem to be a vast and even an absurd assortment of petty details, which are, if not downright intimidating, then at least troublesome. Wow, this guy's aggressive. Now, if you want to close the book there, we would be doing ourselves a disservice, because he goes on in the next 10 pages, which I believe to be the easiest chapter to read in this book is this chapter, and it's a great chapter that brings this to light and brings this to life. We're going to try what we can here. Any questions? Yes. An example that refers to the Jewish nation as a whole. What's an example of that? I don't know. That's a good question. There are, I don't know. Okay, that's a good point. Right. So that's not an individual commandment. It's a commandment. If something happens in a particular place, this should, and right. That's good. You understand what he's saying? He's saying good. For example, let's use that as an example. A wedding, which we might talk about a little later again, is 2 witnesses have to be part of the wedding, but there's no mitzvah for somebody to say, oh, let me go seek to become a witness at a wedding. but the structure requires such that two witnesses be there. So there's no commandment on a person to be a witness, but the structure requires witnesses to be there. That would be a detail. Very good. I like that example. Thank you. Okay. In Judaism, in the mitzvahs, rather, they are divided in three general categories. These three categories are adapted from three different terms that are used all across the Torah when it announces that it's about to share a law with us, which it doesn't always announce. Many times the Torah just talks in a narrative form and elucidates a mitzvah, but many times it says, I'm about to tell you a mitzvah. And when it does that, it sometimes says, Eila hachukim, these are the laws. Sometimes it says, Elu or Zois, Eidos HaTorah, this is the testimony. Sometimes it says, Eila HaMishpatim, these are the laws. It uses three different terminologies, only three, when it talks about different mitzvahs. The question is, why? Sometimes it also says, Eila HaMitzvot, these are the commandments. So there's actually a fourth, but the fourth is general. All these are included in the fourth. So the question is, why would we know the Torah is very meticulous in its words? Why does sometimes it say chukim, sometimes edut, sometimes mishpatim? The simple reason is because there are three different categories or genres of laws. One is, the top one is laws which are completely not understood. These are laws that make no sense to our finite minds. The laws of purity and impurity. The Talmud writes that a sheretz, a creepy crawly, which we know there are 9 of, that make a person impure. The Talmud writes a creepy crawly does not make a person impure, and a mikveh does not make a person pure. But God said that this makes a person impure, and God said that this makes somebody pure, and so it is. But there's no logic or reasoning that has been taught to us that we can appreciate. We believe that there is a reason on some other plane, maybe on other levels of consciousness. But here, there's an entire genre of laws that are not understandable. Many believe that the laws of kosher are in that category. Some people believe kosher to be about cleanliness or about hygiene or about health. Some of that might be true, but many rabbis believe that all of, or at least a very strong portion of kosher dietary laws are in the top category of laws. And laws means that this is above our understanding. We don't know. We just know that that's what God said in the Torah. The next one is eidos, testimony. Testimony are laws that are like Shabbat or holidays. We don't exactly understand why we have to sit in a funny-looking hut for 7 days to remember clouds. Like, why a hut if clouds, right? But there is a bit of a resemblance to an experience that we had, to something that occurred to us as a nation, which produces what we call testimony. Testimony is that there's laws that we do that are about Judaism, the ism of Judaism. We were in the desert for many years, so we celebrate this. We have like a history, and because of there's that. So there's a certain context, or testimony is the right word. There's an experience that we do that testifies that something happened. So these are a little bit more understood than the laws, than the chukim. But then there is an entire genre in Torah, which is a great genre, mishpatim, which is civil obedience. And these are laws that most of us would do on our own. These are laws that are the standard Judeo laws of America are based on civil obedience. And one of the rabbis said that we would learn humility from a cat, and we would learn hard work from an ant. An ant, I think, I don't know if this is true or not, but I think what they say is that an ant lifts more I think it lifts double its weight or triple its weight, which is the greatest lifter of all creatures, or something like that. So we would learn hard work from the ant. We would figure this out. We don't need the Torah to tell it to us, but the Torah told it to us. And there's a reason for that. But that's an entire genre of civil obedience, ethics, things that we should just behave as good human beings. These are three general categories in Torah. I'll run through three just examples. This is the red heifer is known to be the law that King Solomon says, I cannot figure this one out. I figured out the whole world, but this, I just can't figure out. Why you couldn't figure it out, it's another conversation. But that's an example of a law that's just beyond us. Keeping Shabbat or holidays or anything that has to do with our history and our past is part of the testimony. And then finally, I guess this looks something like civil obedience. I want to talk about a few mitzvahs because we could talk about the general, but we'll get a better feel if we find individuals and use them as our guinea pigs to explore from them themselves a little bit more of things that we want to talk about tonight. The first one, can anybody translate the word tzedakah? How do you translate the word tzedakah? Everybody says charity, right? But that's not the real translation. The real translation of tzedakah, who said justice? Justice. So what is it? It's very different. Charity means that a person is giving to help somebody else, but there's no responsibility to give. It's nice that a person is giving. The American giving, it's nice. It's a beautiful thing. We'll give you a tax write-off. It's very nice gesture. In Judaism, tzedakah means justice, the right thing. This is one of the places where we see in the mishpatim category, in the civil obedience category, a difference between the way Judaism sees it and the way America sees it, or the way the world sees it. And that is that one is that it's a kind gesture, and one is that it's a requirement. It's a responsibility on the person who has more to share with the person who has less. It's the just thing to do, not the charitable thing to do. It's different. I want to talk about something else in this mitzvah, which is interesting, is that there's no blessing on tzedakah. Every mitzvah has a blessing, right? Fiddler on the Roof, what blessing do you say on this? What blessing do you say on that? Keep the czar far, far away from us. So what blessing do we say on tzedakah? The blessing of silence. Why don't we make a blessing? Such a beautiful mitzvah. We believe that tzedakah is one of the greatest mitzvahs. Why not make a blessing? It itself is a blessing. It's good, very good. One of the reasons, which is not the reason, but it's just a fun reason that was given, and this brings us a little bit to the discussion of mitzvahs itself, is that when a person understands what a mitzvah is accomplishing in the cosmos, what a mitzvah is doing to ourselves, what a mitzvah is doing to the entire world, they would, if we would understand this, we would go into a trance. We would go into it would completely take over our experience. And there were individuals that before doing a mitzvah, they would go into deep meditations and want to connect with the mitzvah very personally and very deeply and appreciate they would study about it and know its nuances and its details. And before making a blessing, they would get very serious. Imagine somebody would do that before the mitzvah of tzedakah. By the time they finished all their preparation, the guy would be dead on the floor already. So because of that, they made no blessing for this. Charity, give right away. What it illustrates to us is what the expectation is, on the highest level, of course, which I can't say I'm there every day of the week, of how to approach a mitzvah. There is something here, and this is where we're trying to build the understanding of what this is. There is something here that is so divine. There is something here that is so deep that if a person would connect to and understand, it would be transformative. So what is it? What is it that is so unique about the mitzvah that is so inspiring, that is so uplifting? There's another mitzvah, the mitzvah of teshuvah. In America, I think we could make a person uncomfortable. We could. There is no requirement to make them comfortable again. It's nice if you do. There's no legal requirement for anybody to make up with a broken business relationship. Right? It is what it is. Keep going. What's a translation of the word tshuva? We all translate repent. Repent is What's the translation of the word repent? What does repent mean? Something like that. As forgiveness. What's the translation of teshuvah? Somebody said return. What's the difference between return and repent? Return means that there is perfection before things are broken, and then things get broken, and now we want to go back to the way it was. We want to return to the way it was. We almost want to build it back to the way it was before. So return is a requirement. If a person breaks something, they have to fix it. You can't just break and walk away. If you break, you fix. And tshuva is exactly that. Tshuva is that fixing. In America, if we hurt somebody else, we broke them, let's say. Nobody says we have to fix. We might be responsible for damages, whatever it is, but let's say we aren't. We have to fix them. It's fine. But if we would understand that now there is a absence in the universe that has to be returned to its correct self, then we would call upon ourselves a completely different energy to go and rebuild that. And that's tshuva. It's one of the 613 commandments is tshuva, and it's a completely different world. It means to return. It means to rebuild. Okay, we'll leave these two mitzvahs we'll leave them in the mind. We're gonna move on to the next the next point here. Any questions? Page 114, back in our book. Man generally passes through the world aware that it is full of possible colors and meanings, and he tries to make his own connection with all its many possibilities. What he may be less aware of is the fact that there are worlds upon worlds besides the one he knows, dependent on his actions. In Judaism, man is conceived in all the power of his body and soul as the central agent, the chief actor on a cosmic stage. He functions or performs as a prime mover of worlds, being made in the image of the Creator. Ties in a little bit to last week about the image of the Creator, which whoever didn't listen to. It's a great class. Thank you. Man at the crossroads of an interlinked world. And here we're going to do a quick parenthesis where we will again link to previous discussed ideas. We talked about the world being a reflection of different worlds and spiritual energies that dance around the world. Last week we talked about the person, us, being a divine reflection and being very godlike. That's the idea that we talked then. Atzmos being godlike. And here we have now two entities. It was mentioned about duality. This kind of meshes it together. We have two entities. We have the entity of the world that has its entire physical and spiritual structure. We have the entity of the human, that we have our physical and spiritual structure. And now with mitzvahs, what we do is this crisscross. Now we take a person and we engage the world, and the world gives us something, and we give the world something. And now the world and the person become an interlocked entity. And this is one of the miracles of creation, where the person and the world is now becoming one. I don't think that physics spends enough time appreciating this idea. Einstein did. He talked about it in all of energy being interconnected and interchanging itself, right? And the monkey's nose turns into the human's brains, that whole idea that he talks about. Here, what we're saying is that the universe has its set and its rules and its system that I think we talked about in lesson 1. The human has its system, and the interconnection of these two systems creates a cosmic explosion. Even one little mitzvah by one person in one moment creates this cosmic explosion. Even if that person will never do the mitzvah again, even if the person didn't have awareness while they were doing the mitzvah. Again, the why we don't know. Why God chose that taking a lulav branch, a branch of a palm, and putting it together with a lemon, with a citrus, with an esrog, putting it together and shaking it, and that creates this cosmic explosion. Why we don't know. But the what is that this is what happens based on this philosophy, that the mitzvah is taking a portion of the universe, connecting it with the person, and creating this cosmic explosion. Now, if we're aware of this, which sometimes we are more, sometimes we're less. The more we study about each individual mitzvah, the more aware we'll become. We'll approach a mitzvah with great love. Imagine the opportunity that we have right now to do something that can have an effect for years and years to come. So thing number one is that man is at a crossroads of an interlinked world with mitzvahs. And it's this crisscross engagement. I want to mention it quickly. I don't want to go into that subject. It's an entire subject of its own. It's a very complex subject. It's not as clear-cut as some things seem in the Torah. But we know that along with mitzvahs, there is reward and punishment in Torah. And reward and punishment is a very complex subject in Torah. But there is one rabbi, the Abarbanel, who is a Spanish rabbi, who argued that rewards in the world are physical reactions of spiritual accomplishments. And he believed that reward in this world was automatic. He would say that when a person eats and feels pleasure in their mouth is not a reward for eating. It's a physical component of the universe that we have taste buds, and when you eat, you feel good in your mouth. And he argued that all of the rewards of the world are direct physical expressions of this spiritual cosmic explosion. Now, not all rabbis agreed with him. Many rabbis said that he's manifesting it too coarse. It's reward and punishment we don't see in this world. We don't experience it in our lifetimes. These are things that, if we're lucky, in the next world. But I just want to bring out that there were rabbis that believed that this interconnected experience was so powerful that they believed that we were able to experience it while we were living here in our corporal images, which is I think is an amazing philosophy. Take some of it, leave some of it. It's a big world. Anyway, so that was a little parentheses on this. I want to go now to another point about mitzvahs. Yes, please. You're asking good. What you're asking is, why is it that if mitzvahs are so powerful, why have so many been removed from our experience? Is that what you're asking? We should be able to do many more, right? That's what you're asking. Why are we limited and then give us only 20, right, or 80? It's a good question. I will try to address it in one of the last segments of tonight. Not to leave it undone. So just quickly, we believe along with this that the entire universe and the entire course of time is also interconnected. And because of that, if there is a person that certain mitzvahs are out of their reach, that's an indication that they don't have to do those to create whatever mission they're here to accomplish. That's not for them. Just like there are mitzvahs for a king that do not apply to a regular person, that's fine. That's not, their soul doesn't need that. And the place in the world that they are partaking in will not gain or lose from that mitzvah. So part of this philosophy is that we are placed in the very specific places with personalities, with characters that exist in order to accomplish the mitzvahs that are within our realm, because those are the ones that are needed at this very specific time in history to be accomplished by us. Our soul and our space and our time. Exactly. And we're gonna touch upon that exact thing shortly. Let's continue on page 113 in the book, and then we're going to go on to the next part here. What we call details, however, are only parts of greater units, which in turn combine in various ways into a single entity. It's as though in examining the leaves and flowers of a tree, one were to be overwhelmed by the abundance, the variety, the complexity of detail. But when one realizes that it's all part of the same single growth, all part of the same branching out into manifold forms of the one tree, then the details would cease to be disturbing and would be more accepted as intrinsic to the wondrousness of the whole. And that's a little bit addressing what you're talking about. If we see the leaves as individuals, then we'll have the question, well, why didn't I get 613 leaves? But if we see the leaves as part of the tree, then, all right, I have 80 leaves, you have 80 leaves, and together is what creates the tree. Continuing on 114, the Jewish attitude is that life in all its aspects, in its totality, must somehow or other be bound up with holiness. This attitude is expressed in part with conscious action. That is, through the utterance of prescribed prayers and blessings and following prescribed forms of conduct, and in part by adhering to a number of prohibitions. What he's saying over here is that the vastness of 613 or even 80, the idea is that our entire experience should be engulfed by this spiritual space that we can find ourselves in. And the way for our entire experience to be surrounded by it is by having so many different details in so many different places, in so many different times. There was exactly how the story goes, I don't remember, but there was an exchange that happened many times between Jewish leaders and the local non-Jewish authorities. And one of these exchanges were that the authority of the time told the rabbi, I think it was the Kuzri, Rabbi Yehuda was his name, and he told him, what's with your commandments? You know that we have a section in the Code of Jewish Law that tells us what to do in the bathroom. What thoughts you can have in the bathroom, with which hand to use. I don't want to get too graphic here. And he told everybody, you guys are crazy. And there was another person that was sitting there, and he says, can you imagine how incredible this is? They are so surrounded by this. There's no space that exists where God is absent. Their entire existence is completely absorbed by spirituality. It's an unbelievable thing. Tell me another religion that has that. So this is what he's saying in the last paragraph here, that there is this, what's created through so many commandments is that there's almost never a moment that we're not surrounded by something. There's always something going on. There's always an ability to connect somewhere or somehow something. More mitzvahs equals more caffeine. What this illustration is that we are feeding the universe and all the universes with every mitzvah that we do. Another point here is about refinement. This is a completely different discussion in the mitzvah. So we had so far a few discussions. We had one that we talked about the interconnectedness of the universe. We talked about just briefly that through a mitzvah we contribute to the universe. The universe gets an additional boost of energy of some sort. There's another thing that happens with mitzvahs, and this is less on the outside and more on the inside. One of the ideas of mitzvahs is that it makes us more refined. This is one of the things that we say. There's a Mishnah that says that God wanted to give us merits. What does merits mean? Lezakos es Yisrael. Lezakos can also mean to purify, to make pure, to make refined. How do we become more refined? Through mitzvahs. What does it mean to become more refined? Every child is born loving candy. I don't know how. Who gave them the memo that candy is good? But it seems that whoever discovered candy realized that a bold palate is going to be susceptible to liking candy. But somebody discovered that you could train a palate to discover new flavors. And what do they call it in a not a delicate palate? There's a word for it. Huh? That's in Hebrew. How do you say it in English? A refined palate, maybe. A person who appreciates flavors. You know, a kid, you're going to give them a bubbly white wine or grape juice. That's what they love. To a person who has the developed flavors, they can't drink that stuff. What are you drinking, Manischewitz? You know, you drink a nice fine wine. This is something you can drink. So there's a refined palate that takes a lot of work and time to become more refined. We believe that one of the purposes of creation is for us to refine ourselves. For us, that we were, King David says that we were, or King Solomon, he says we were born wild donkeys. But that's how we were born. And the idea is that we should not die wild donkeys, we should die refined human beings. And the way to do that is through a process of refinement. And a process of refinement, this number 2 argues, is done through mitzvahs. Mitzvahs create this refinement. The question will be, where do we see that in mitzvahs? Where do we see that mitzvahs create refinement? I don't know. I think though, there's four mitzvahs that I wrote down here. I didn't put it on the board. That I think we can appreciate that these four mitzvahs give us a certain delicateness, a certain feeling of something beyond us. Because that's what refinement is. A refined person is a person who is more sensitive to others, more sensitive to the world around them, more delicate. So talk about the Pesach Seder, for example, is an experience that makes people feel that we're part of a history of 3,000 years. It creates refinement, whether we like it or not. Being a part of such a setting, it makes us, it elevates us. It puts us into a zone where we're not alone. We're a part of this incredible history. It's a state of refinement. A more aggressive state of refinement physically is a bris. A bris, we actually take a piece off a person, which is a level of refinement. Now, it's very coarse, it's aggressive, but it's a place where we see this quest for something holy, for something above us. Another example is Kaddish. Thank God I'm not in that world, Baruch Hashem, for many years. May my parents live and be well. But those that unfortunately have dealt with Kaddish, with saying Kaddish or Kaddish, as we, right, Kaddish. So they have experienced this refinement where a person takes a long time to leave. It's 11 months of Kaddish. It's a process where worlds are being connected. We're living in soul land. It's a whole different space. Kaddish is one of those things that just elevate a person. We talked about weddings before. I think weddings is another such space. And wedding, it's become a universal thing, which is a good thing, I believe, I hope. And weddings is one of those places as well where a person is putting themselves aside for something greater than themselves. And the person that doesn't do that is not going to have a happy wedding. They'll have a happy wedding, but I don't know about a happy marriage. That's what it's about. It's a mitzvah. One of the 613 commandments is to get married. It's a mitzvah to get married. So it's a place where we see again this refinement. There are many more examples, but I chose these few, and let me hear from you. Our tradition is that we only say Kaddish for parents, unless children as well, a spouse. Brothers and sisters in the Ashkenazi community doesn't say Kaddish for it. Sephardi say for siblings? Interesting. Okay, yes. You're right. With Yizkor, I stand corrected. With Yizkor, you're correct, and that is more expansive. The Yizkor itself is much broader, although, at least in the custom that I practice, those that have parents will not stay in synagogue during that service. Once a person is in there, they just throw everything on him. Okay. There's here. We're starting to run short on time. Oh, I did write it here. Seder night, bris, Kaddish, and wedding. Okay. But there's a catch is important. Because more mitzvahs, more refinement, more energy in the world. But there's a catch, is the catch that I don't like. The catch that I don't like is that we're never going to see this. At least not unless we're on the Abarbanel's team. We won't see this. We won't see the difference in the world if we did a mitzvah, if we didn't do a mitzvah. Sometimes we won't see it in ourselves, the difference. Sometimes we will, sometimes we won't. And that's an overall catch that I would say exists in almost every lesson that we had so far, that seeing is going to be secondary to believing in these conversations. And I wish we can see it. Although I had a conversation with somebody today and he had this question, why don't we see? Why don't we see? I think that if we did see, we would never have any temptations for anything other than spirituality. And that would not be healthy for an operational world either. So I don't know. Maybe God knew what he was doing after all. I don't know. Maybe. On which? The catch? Yes. I love what you're saying. You're illustrating strongly that you do see that mitzvahs do create refinement and do make a clear difference. I hear that. I like it. It's a good question. You're saying they did see it and it knocked them out. It didn't do what I'm describing. I hear that. I hear that. You're saying that if we would see it, not necessarily would it actually have the impact we think it would. Maybe it would just, right. Also, over there, it did stop. The revelation did end. Imagine the revelation never ended, then they would just remain in this trance forever. Possibly. Maybe not, but possibly. Yes. Of course. Yes, that's well said. Well said. Yes, that in the category of mitzvot that are connected to kindness, gemilut chasadim, that category would we see that refines people and that creates a better environment without a question. Yes, very well said. Very well said. Yes, I keep coming back. I'm just kidding. You're supporting. Remind me again, Bobby's words that you're saying that you see and feel mitzvahs strongly, and that's incredible. I think that's great. I feel them sometimes. Every right, and yes, you're saying good. You're saying good. All right, the third step in mitzvahs. So we had so far the interconnectedness of the universe and the human. We had adding energy into the world, spiritual energy into the world. This one is a little wild, but it's not in the book. It's not in chapter 10. It's a fundamental in spiritual philosophy. Why it didn't make it in, I don't know. Maybe he was short on words, short on pages. This is a idea that comes from the Arizal, who we have here some sources. The Arizal lived 1534 to 1572. How many years is that? 36 years? He died very young. He died in Sfat. He's buried there. You could see these are two students of his. One 10 years his junior, 1548 to 1620. The Ramemi Pano, his name was Reb Menachem Ezra of Pano. Pano is, I believe, a place in Italy, but he also ended up relocating to Sfat. 38. So then my year might be off. Yeah, it might be 36 or 38, something like that. He died very young. And another student of his was the Megala Amukais. He also around the same years, 1585, 1633. You see he's a little bit younger than them. But in the same, he actually never saw the Arizal, right? He was born later. But he's in that same group. These are what they called the Kabbalists of Tzfat. These are those that are the not creators of the philosophy, but the revealers of the philosophy. The philosophy itself, as we discussed in the first lesson, goes back to, according to some opinions, the first man, to Adam himself from the Sefer Hayetzira. But those that dispersed it, primarily the Arizal and his students, talk about a completely another dimension to mitzvahs. And this dimension is what I call here Sparks elevation theory. Not theory, it's been proven, it's a fact, right? I'm gonna get thrown some sushi at me. It's not a theory. Yes, it's not a theory. Sparks elevations. He takes a word in the first section of the Torah, which talks about the chaos that exists in the world. It's in the second verse. And the pasuk says, V'ruach Elokim merachefes. The Spirit of God was hovering, is the way most English translators translate the word merachefes. Rachfan today, if some of you are reading some Hebrew news or news in Hebrew, Rachfan are these drones. So Ruach Elokim merachefes, it's droning or hovering. He takes now merachefes is a word that doesn't find itself, I believe, anywhere else in the Chumash. I think that it's only there. So it's a unique word, and it's a word that for linguistics, it's a surprising word. What does it mean? And he breaks the word down. He says that you take the beginning and the end of the word, you say the Spirit of God, merachefes, take out the middle, you have the beginning is memtaf. Memtaf is met. The Spirit of God died. All right? And it died in Reish Peches. It died in 248. What it's saying, something like this, is that the energy of God was a singular entity during creation, but something happened in the time of chaos, where it was tohu vavohu. In that verse of chaos, something happened, and the Spirit of God exploded. It died. It exploded. It left. Something left from where it was. It was in the wholesome oneness of God, and it set sail on its own elsewhere, which is what death is. Death is the movement from one place to another place. And it's 248, what he calls lost sparks. There's lost sparks, pieces of God, that have been dispersed all across the universe during the time of chaos, during the time of Tohu Vavohu, of nothingness. And it became our responsibility through mitzvahs to go find them. Now we're on a hunt for these 248 lost sparks. And by now, some of these sparks may have expanded. Because if a lost spark, let's say, got incarnated inside a piece of wheat, and that wheat then was planted, and that plant now has thousands of children wheats, so now that spark that was lost is dispersed all over the place. And now it requires a huge effort of tens of thousands of people over thousands of years to go and collect these sparks again. And his argument is that when we collect all these sparks, we'll go back to the way it was during creation, where God and his name were one, and that's the days of Mashiach. And this is the sparks elevation theory, that what we do with mitzvahs actually accomplishes something. And what we're saying, whether we feel it, whether we don't feel it, what it's accomplishing is it's doing something in the lost sparks world. It could be that he didn't put it in the book because it's just so so outlandish, but it's so fundamental in Kabbalistic talks. This is something that all three talk about, and it becomes a classic in Kabbalistic and Hasidic texts. So I felt it was the right thing to share when we talk about mitzvahs, another dimension of what mitzvahs accomplish. Any questions on this dimension? It's similar. It follows the same theory of tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is the not extraction but retraction of God, and this theory argues that God is everywhere, right? God is everywhere, so we believe. So why can't you see him? Why can't you feel him? Because we talked about last week also a little bit that one of the dimensions that God created is that he makes himself not felt. That's one of the dimensions of being God-like that we talked about, was that he makes himself not felt. Can't see his origin. Can't see that he's here. And when we say that these sparks are gone, or terminologies like this, it means something like they were hidden. Not that they're actually lost. Not that they'd be damned, heaven forbid. They're hidden. And our job is to reveal it. And when we take something, for example, a wheat, and it turns into l'chaim, and we make a blessing, and we wish each other something nice with it, that lifts it up. And that now is revealing, even though it's not revealing to our eyes, it's revealing in whatever realm, it's revealing its true purpose. Its true purpose is here for something greater than getting drunk at a party. Part of this theory, just quickly, is that he argues, the same rabbis, the same Arizal, that from the 248, 202 were already retrieved. We were in Egypt, 202 were already retrieved, and he says, "V'gam erev rav ala itam." When the Jews left Egypt, it says that the erev rav is known to be the troublemakers. The troublemakers went out with us; they were called the erev rav. But the Arizal was very positive, and in general, a lot of his writings are positive, and he doesn't like what's the word? He finds the godly spirit inside everything. So even though commonly the Erev Rav is known as the troublemakers, he argued that Erev Rav, the mix of Reish Beis of 202, those sparks is what came out of Egypt with them. And he says that the whole exile to Egypt was in order to retrieve 202 sparks. And all that we're left with now is Peches, is, 80, what's the math? 248. What did we have? 248 minus 202. Help me out. 46. Oh, that's a Pevav, 46. Not that many. Not that many. We should be done by now. What's going on? 3,000 years. In Egypt, they were there 200 years. They did 200. 86 is, 46 is, how many? 46. Why do I have it in my head 86? I don't know. Okay. Rapach is 248, 284. That's why. My number is incorrect. It's not 248, it's 284. It's 284. No, it's 86. It's 86. And the reason why 86 is the number in my head is because 86 is Elohim. Elohim is 86. Elohim is still remaining. All right, enough for now. Yes? Let's go back to where we came from. Back to the Talmud. We went to the Arizal, we went to the mystics. Let's close this out with the Talmud. The Talmud is known to be a little bit more practical, a little bit more, physical. The Talmud in Shabbat, page 118b, tells us a very interesting exchange between different rabbis. And the exchange begins with one rabbi saying that I deserve great rewards because I am particular in a specific mitzvah. And then another rabbi says, I deserve a great reward because I'm particular in a specific mitzvah. And what emerges from this conversation, we'll read it quickly in a minute, is that there was a concept people called, what is your mitzvah? What is your, b'mai hava avicha zahir tfei? What was your father's favorite mitzvah? What is your favorite mitzvah? What we find here is something very nice. And that is that the Torah is very, very vast. And mitzvahs are very vast. And not always will be able to do every mitzvah. At least most of us won't be able to always. But what the Gemara is telling us here is that there has long been a tradition of people, individuals, finding singular mitzvahs that becomes their pet project. That becomes their mitzvah. And it's very interesting because you would think that rabbis as great as the authors of the Talmud, what do you mean? They're going to choose their pet mitzvah? No, every mitzvah is amazing. And that's not the case. We find, I believe that they kept all the mitzvahs the best they can. But they found individual mitzvahs that their soul, that their experience connected to more with. I want to run through it quickly because it's great. Rab Nachman said, may I receive my reward because I fulfilled the obligation to eat 3 meals on Shabbos magnificently. You see? He's not celebrating that he fasted for Yom Kippur 3 days in a row. He's saying that he celebrated Shabbos. He sat around the table and he had a good time. And he wants a reward for it. And that's very nice. He's finding his space where mitzvahs and him are not in conflict with each other, where him and mitzvahs are in sync with each other. And that's something very beautiful. The next rabbi, he says, Rabbi Yehuda says, may I receive my reward because I fulfilled my obligation of consideration during prayer. When I pray, I'm very focused. Okay, a little more refined maybe. Rav Huna, son of Rabbi Yeshua, said, may I receive my reward because I never walked 4 cubits with my head uncovered. He was very careful about the Amokeh, which is interesting that he should point that out because that would indicate that some of his buddies were not so careful. All right, just a little parenthesis there. Rav Shesha said, may I receive my reward because I fulfilled the mitzvah of phylacteries, tefillin, magnificently. And Rav Nachman said, may I receive my reward because I fulfilled the mitzvah of ritual fringes. He always wore tzitzis, and he was very careful with that. Rabbi Yosef said to Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbah, 2 Rabbi Yosefs, different people with the same name. In what area, he asks him, was your father, Rabbah? Rabbah was known to be one of the greatest rabbis of his time. So Rabbi Yosef, who is a student of Rabbah, is asking his buddy, Rabbah's son, he says, tell me, what was your father's favorite? We're on the subject of favorites. He wanted to know, the greatest rabbi of the time, what was your father's favorite? And here is, in what area was your father, Rabbah, especially vigilant? And he said to him, it was in the mitzvah of ritual fringes, of tzitzit. The Gemara relates, one day he was climbing the stairs when a string from his tzitzit was severed, and he would not descend until he placed a new string on the garment. That indicated how careful he was with the mitzvah of tzitzit. Okay, So all I want to bring out from this is that we had a long discussion about mitzvahs. It's very broad, a lot of different elements here and there. And it would be nice maybe that we find a singular place, a singular spot where we could do this. Should we wrap up? Let's go a little, another few minutes. We're hitting 60 minutes. We're fine. Nobody's in a rush. Page 127 in the book. Thus, in all walks of social existence, the obligation is not only to refrain from things that may be injurious to others, but to act deliberately and wholeheartedly to improve and raise the order of life. There is, for instance, the ancient custom of giving a tenth of one's wealth to charity to help others in any way that seems appropriate. Although the general aim of the ethic is to perfect the society, every individual is related to in supreme earnestness. A single person is reckoned as though he were a world, a totality unto itself. And the concern for him has to be the same mixture of love and respect that one renders to a divine manifestation. The same kind of approach is valid, of course, for the notion as a whole. The Jewish people should see itself as a single large family, as a special social entity with personal ties kept close and firm. This national entity is considered primary not as a sum of many separate parts, but as that which results when one rises in level from one soul to another and reaches such a greater perfection that all the souls of Israel constitute one general soul, that is the divine manifestation in the world. Therefore, the various souls relate to one another as parts of one body, and from this point of view, the higher a person rises, the trials and difficulties involved are increasingly concerned with one's fellow man. For every human being is part of the single soul, that is the spirit of the entire universe. Again, beautiful words that illustrate this idea that when one person does one mitzvah, it lifts everybody up. In conclusion, one of the greatest mitzvahs of the Torah we read last week or 2 weeks ago in the Torah is the mitzvah of loving our fellow as ourselves. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. We know that Rabbi Akiva, who is going to be celebrated on Lag BaOmer somewhat for the end of the pandemic that occurred back then. Rabbi Akiva was the one who said that a major rule in Torah is Ahavat Yisrael, loving our fellow as ourselves. Hillel, when he was asked by the convert asked Hillel, convert me and teach me the whole Torah on one foot. So Shammai, the rough rabbi, took a meter stick and whacked him and sent him flying. Says, we don't teach on one foot over here. Over here, we sit down and we learn diligently. Hillel told him, I'll give it to you all on one foot. And he said, love your fellow as yourself. That's the entire Torah on one foot. The rest is commentary. The Baal Shem Tov illustrated this, and he said that for 70 or 80 years, a person could live here on this planet just to do a favor for another once. Just for that was worth the entire tiltul hanefesh, the entire journey of the soul, to do a favor for another. I want to conclude with a story, because I love stories. This story takes us to post-World War II. In Paris, we have a friend. His name is Dov. And Dov was a rabbi in the old country, survived the Nazis by the skin of his teeth. He survived the camps and everything. But he was young. He was, in his 30s. He comes post-war. He can't get a job. He speaks an old language. He relates in an old way. And he finds himself alone looking for work. He has a friend. I didn't get his friend's name, so we're going to call his friend Moshe. Moshe knows the qualities of Dov, and he feels bad that Dov is having this difficult run. He gets a job, but he doesn't really do so well at it, and he works here and he works there. Finally, one day, Moshe comes over to Dov and he says, Dov, I got you your dream job. And Dov's face lights up, says, what do you got? What do you got? He says, the biggest synagogue in Paris is hiring. And I took care of everything. I secured your position. You're going to be a rabbi at the biggest synagogue in Paris. And he says, what? Me? The biggest? His face lit up. And Moshe tells Dov, but the rabbis in this country are different than the rabbis in the old country. The rabbis in the old country, they would talk and lead and do these types of things. Here, they want you to lead by example. So you stay quiet, you stay in the corner, you do your thing, you pray, you be a good example for the community, and they want to pay you to do that. This is incredible. That's a dream. And he's very excited. He goes and he starts his first day on the job. What he didn't know was that Moshe had a conversation with the president, and who the president was looking to hire was a janitor. They needed somebody to keep the place clean. It's a very big place. And Moshe knew that Dov would not be a janitor, but to be a silent rabbi he would be. And every day Moshe would go himself to do the janitorial work. And meanwhile, Dov was rabbiing silently in his seat until one day where the president comes to Dov and starts coming down on him. You know, you should clean this place a little bit more detailed, and this place you should clean on Tuesdays. Why do you wait till Wednesdays? And he starts going down on him, and Dov makes with his head, okay, and he goes away. And Moshe from the side sees that there was an exchange, but he didn't catch what happened. So he runs over to the president. He says, what happened? So he says, so the president tells him, well, I told him, he's the janitor. I told him that he has to clean a little bit better here, a little bit better there. Okay. So Moshe accepted, to do his work a little bit better. Moshe goes to Dov and he says, Dov, what did the president tell you? He says, I don't speak French. I have no idea. This went on for a decade. Where Moshe would go diligently, daily or weekly, and clean, while his buddy Moshe was the cleaner, and that's Ahavas Yisrael. That's brotherly love. There's no mitzvah in the world that is a mitzvah like that. So if there is a mitzvah that we need to choose, there's many, many mitzvahs that we can choose, but this is a great mitzvah. The mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael. We'll conclude with this. Thank you very much for another great evening. And next one is our last one of this series.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.